What's up, viewers, subscribers, and agents alike? It's your boy Enlightened Luciferian Prince coming at y'all once again. This video today, people, is going to be on voter suppression in the United States and the reason why I don't vote. Yes, people, this is the truth. I don't vote because I will say it, and I will say it time and time again until the day that my Creator designates it for me to be my last breath. I don't trust government. I know that government is full of trickery, and I know that the plot behind it is not what is presented to the American people. However, for those people who are totally outside of the loop on voter suppression and the tactics that they use, they pull, and the maneuvers that they use to otherwise dissuade mainly people of color from actually having some political say-so, stems all the way back to the time of Reconstruction. Now, most people are familiar with what Reconstruction is. Reconstruction is nothing more than a time after the settled socioeconomic structure was based upon chattel slavery and people actually gained emancipation, or what I should say definitively, those people who were held as slaves actually gained their emancipation to freely roam, so forth and so on, and become established and move on through life, whatever. History varies in how Reconstruction actually took place, but we know that from the history and the annals of history, we know that many people of color were actually successful at that time, but we'll get into that later on, especially in the anniversary of later on this month. I definitely will put that video up, universe willing. But to keep it focused on the voting, you have to realize that there were also groups or splinter groups of individuals who felt that they had a need to compete with people of color in the South. And these were the opposite end of the spectrum, the Caucasians, who were the displaced, the defeated Confederate so-called army in South and Southeast regions, and those states that joined the Union as well. Now, during Reconstruction, there was a time where people had self-determination, people of color, and it was like, look, check this out. Amendments were actually made to the Constitution. People were educated. So they found out that they could actually voice their political opinion in the political arena. So not only did they gain freedom via emancipation, but they could also vote, and their previous condition of servitude didn't affect that. White America didn't like that. White America still doesn't like that. Now, people think I'm tripping when I say this because yesteryear, it was the terrorist tactics that they used to otherwise lynch, intimidate, murder, rape, you name it, vandalize, terrorize people of color because they wanted to suppress their voice at the polls. But this was only done strategically because they knew that these new, once minority, now majority people can have a political sway. And it happened all over the South. Don't get me wrong. This happened in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, certain parts of Tennessee, Georgia, you know what I mean? You name it. You know what I'm saying? And this is the truth that it really is established still to this day. You know what I'm saying? Especially in the South. Now, I want to focus on something today that still has taken place, post-Reconstruction, but it's still taking place today. Now, back in March, I think March 25th of 2021, Brian Kemp, he signed an election bill amidst the public outcry. Now, Brian Kemp signed this bill, like closed door. You know what I'm saying? This was closed door session. This was closed. So I believe if you go back to the story on YouTube, you could actually see, I will leave a link in the video, description, but I will show you that even in the instances where a female who's melanated, she's a state representative, her name is Park Cannon, she's a female, older lady, she was a Democrat, she represents Atlanta, she was placed in handcuffs because, she was knocking on the door, not being rude, but, Georgia State Troopers, the Blue Klux Klan was sitting there basically making sure that she didn't interrupt, the good old boy session. And if you had followed, the public media and the politics and so forth, if you actually do pay attention to this stuff. Now, I'm not saying, this is like some sort of cult follow. I'm just saying pay attention to what goes on around you politically. But when Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp were actually running against each other for the governor's seat, I mean, the lady won. You know what I'm saying? She won hands down. But when you're a part of the good old boys club, you know how that rolls. At the time, Brian Kemp, he was endorsed by Trump. At the time, Stacey Abrams, she was endorsed by President Barack Obama. Well, former President Barack Obama. And, that was kind of controversial. I mean, she's going hard. And I think that at the time, they were also trying to suppress votes, too, because they were, closing down polling stations in certain parts of Atlanta. They were basically like shutting them down, like, closing down polling stations in urban areas, while on the outskirts in the suburbs, they were leaving the polls open for those people who were of the opposite hue, and they were open all day. Certain poll stations that were also in Atlanta got flooded. Certain ones just got closed. Machines weren't working. It was always a catastrophe when it came down to people of color actually having to vote. However, they still made it work, because most people actually did what was called a mail-in ballot, and this is where they basically beat them at. Because if we can't go poll, if we can't go in public, we'll do it via mail. So Stacey Abrams actually filed a federal lawsuit where she basically was like, and then I'm talking about in record time, like she filed in like less than 24 hours, and the judge agreed, like, yo, we're gonna count these by hand, and they literally did this. They counted it by hand, like straight up, and she won. You know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, the vote was stolen because, again, it was a good old boys club. Now, people might disagree. I mean, you might disagree, but unless you live in the South, you don't really know what the fuck I'm talking about, because you might be stuck in your own polarized political atmosphere. But I'm telling you, this is something that was actually covered by news and media. Don't take my word for it. Look up the stories. You know what I'm saying? Anywho, without further ado, let's check this out. Governor Brian Kemp drew protests. This is Thursday. This was in March, as he signed into law a sweeping Republican-sponsored overhaul of state elections that includes new restrictions on voting by mail, which I told you earlier was the #1 reason why Stacey Abrams won the basic popular vote, and greater legislative control on how elections are run. Greater legislative control on how elections are run, meaning the legislature, according to the state, is the one that oversees the election. That's very dangerous, because that means that even if you do vote, they're going to take it upon themselves, and basically deem themselves, the judge and jury when it comes to actual elections. And that's very dangerous, if you ask me, because that means the minority can hold sway over the majority, who actually have the valid vote or the valid capacity to actually pass for the possible candidate. But they don't think we know this stuff. We just are just all sheep. Anywho, everybody's not that dumb. Democrats and voting rights groups say the law will disproportionately disfranchise voters of color. It is one wave of GOP-backed election bills introduced in states around the country. After former President Donald Trump stoked false claims that fraud led to his 2020 election defeat. I don't want to get into that. We already know how that turned out. It is what it is. The man lost. Boo-hoo. It is what it is. Shit ain't gonna get no better. They both work for the same beast. Don't matter. It's just the lesser of two evils. President Joe Biden called such GOP efforts un-American and sick during a news conference Thursday, and a group of voter mobilization groups filed a lawsuit late Thursday in federal court in Atlanta challenging the new law, which they can do. After the November election last year, I knew, like so many of you, that significant reforms of our state elections were needed, said Kemp, who was endorsed by Trump, who drew Trump's ire after certifying Biden's victory in Georgia. Kemp signed the bill less than 2 hours after it cleared the Georgia General Assembly. The State House approved it 100-75 before the State Senate quickly agreed to House changes 34-20. Republicans supported with Democrats opposed. As we often know, it worked in favor for the opposite party. Funny thing about this is that the story that was covered on YouTube has totally been taken down from YouTube, from the YouTube community that covered this particular story. It's gone. It's removed from YouTube. At his first news conference, Bill harshly criticized Republican moves to limit voting rights and vowed to do all he could with allies to stop the effort. The Republican voters I know find this despicable. Republican voters, the folks outside the White House, I'm not talking about elected officials, I'm talking about voters, which are the people, Biden said. In Georgia, Democratic State Senate Minority Leader Gloria Butler called the efforts of Republicans voter suppression tactics. We are witnessing right now a massive and unabashed assault on voting rights unlike anything we've ever seen since the Jim Crow era, Butler said. As Kemp delivered his remarks, he was interrupted by a commotion before a live stream of the event cut out. Democratic State Republican Park Cannon, who was black, was arrested by Capitol Police amid a protest after knocking on the door of the governor's office during his remarks. Video captured by a bystander shows Cannon, who was handcuffed with her arms behind her back, being forcibly removed from the Capitol by 2 officers. One on each arm, she says, "Where are you taking me?" and stop as she is being taken from the building. Cannon was charged with felony obstruction of law enforcement, punishable by up to 1 to 5 years in prison, and with disrupting a session of the General Assembly. She was released late Thursday night. It wasn't immediately known if Cannon had a lawyer who could comment. Well, we already know. You're a state representative. You probably got the cream of the crop when it comes to a lawyer. We already know that's the truth, so we ain't going to play that game. You know. The Georgia law requires a photo ID in order to vote absentee by mail. After more than 1.3 million Georgia voters used that option during the COVID-19 epidemic, it also cuts the time people have to request an absentee ballot and limits where ballot drop boxes can be placed and when they can be accessed. Remember, I told y'all, I said that earlier in my conversation when I opened up the video, that this is what they really did. They did everything they could to try to suppress the vote, but not realizing that it actually worked to the benefit of the people who actually were eligible to vote by absentee ballot due to COVID. So it backfired on them. Now, Democratic Republican Rhonda Burno, said the bill is based on lies told by Republicans after November's elections. Her statement: Georgians turned out record-breaking numbers because they could access the ballot. Burno said, "Lies upon lies were told about our elections in response, and now this bill is built before us on those same lies." Republican Rep. Jen Jones said the provisions cutting the time people have requested an absentee ballot are meant to increase the likelihood of a voter's vote being cast successfully. After concerns were raised about mail ballots not being received in time to be counted. That's why I told you, Stacey Abrams, she knew already, like, yo, I'm going to make sure we're going to count these by hand because I'm not playing that bullshit. One of the biggest changes given to the GOP-controlled legislature, more control over election administration, that has raised alarm about potential greater partisan influence. The law replaces the elected Secretary of State as the chair of the State Election Board with a new appointee of the legislature at the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, rebuffed Trump's attempt to overturn Georgia's election results. It also allows the board to remove and replace county election officials deemed to be underperforming. That provision is widely seen as something that could be used to target Fulton County, which is majority melanated. They say Democrat, but it's melanated. A Democratic stronghold covering most of Atlanta, which came under fire of the long lines plagued summertime primary elections. Like I told y'all before, it was a mess. Here we go. Republican Rep. Barry Fleming, a driving force in crafting the law, said the provision will only be a temporary fix, so to speak, that ends and control is turned back over to the locals after the problems are resolved. The law also reduces the time frame in which runoff elections are held, including the amount of early voting for runoffs, and it bars outside groups from handing out food or water for people in line to vote. That means if you out there, you handling your business, they can't even give you a bottle of water, man. You can't even get water, man. They'll go to jail. Now, you know off the muscle, if you're a responsible enough adult, you're going to have your own provisions, but not everybody thinks that way. But literally, the people who are out there supporting people, you know, they try to fatigue you, basically, you know. So people, if you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're going to cast the ballot, or you're going to replenish your senses. I think the average person would go replenish themselves, which is what they really want anyway. Long story short, it's all bait and switch, man. Let's go. The law does not contain some of the more contentious proposals floated by Republicans earlier, including limits on early voting on Sundays, a popular day for black churchgoers to vote, and souls to the polls. You know, we'll get there later on in the series, but that's what they call it. Events. It instead mandates 2 Saturdays of early voting ahead of general elections, where only one had been mandatory, and leaves 2 Sundays as optional. A lawsuit filed late Thursday in the United States District Court in Atlanta by 3 groups, New Georgia Project, Black Voters Matter Fund, and RISE, challenged key provisions of the new law and said that they violated the Voting Rights Act. There was no immediate response from Georgia officials. Never is. Now, people, this is me giving you my spill of the tea for my point. I don't fucking vote. I removed myself from voter registration years and years and years ago. I learned early in life. See, before we become awake, we have to realize that we have been fools, you know, and we get rocked by the social opiate called peer pressure. And I, earlier in life, felt like it was my obligation to go vote and go to the polls. Let me tell you something. I was a fucking fool, you know? And once I came to the realization that it didn't matter, and not to mention that you're actually pledging yourself, and when you actually do vote in an election, because if you notice when you actually do your UCC1 filings and so forth and so on, majority of the departments in the quote-unquote corporate United States where you turn your documentation to is the Department of Elections. So at the same token, you are now pledging yourself to reallocate the expenses of the United States Corporation, which is a bankrupt entity. So all they do is they count your vote, you know what I'm saying, as long as you being a registered voter, because you don't register real people, you register property, you register things. You register what is called legal definitions called the res, or the thing. So now you become the subject matter of the vote. So now they take your vote and then they pledge you and then they refinance the expenses that are actually, you know, spent those 4 prior years while this one CEO is in office, and now they switch out another one. Because those aren't presidents. Those are corporate executive officers. That's what they are. So not only do you vie to actually participate in a corporate election, you now are looked at as a corporate fictional entity, which in any instance, you don't have any rights. And those rights that they wish to attribute to you are commercial rights, not natural. So people, if, you know, moving yourself from voter registration, best thing I ever done for myself, you know, not on voter registration anywhere. If I ever go any place and they ask me to voter registrate, no. You know what I'm saying? Period. I love it when I'm in public and people ask me have I voted. No. They're like, well, why? Well, I asked them this question. Why have you done it? You know, give me a valid reason why you've done it, and I can give you a very valid reason on why I have not done it. And I can give you facts and evidence. See, you got to get out of the sheeple mode where people feel like you have to curtail, you know, your personal, you know, private, existence to try to appease the public conscience. Let me tell you something. If you want to vote, it's your choice. Do what you want to do. If you feel as if that's your social civic duty, by all means, do what you must. But if you don't, I suggest you remove yourself from voter registration, because if you don't, you will still be considered by the state in which you reside an absentee, and they can factor in your vote without your consent, because guess what? They need your identification in order for it to happen. And who is the issuing entity that always issues identifications on behalf of people? The Department of Driver Services, or the DMV, whatever they call it where you are. So these people can take it upon themselves, if they deem necessary, to actually elect you by an absentee because you registered to vote with that entity. People don't believe it happens, but it actually does, because you have to realize that you registered with them. So you're now considered property of the state. Fine. So your signature on your driver's license is signature enough and consent enough for them to opt in and put you down, if need be. Now, I'm not saying they do this spontaneously, but they have all your, particular attributes on your documentation, so they know who they can have and who they can have not vote. So it's one of those situations. There's some things that go on behind the scenes that you're not really aware of. I know it sounds kind of scary, but remove yourself from voter registration if you don't want that to be you. The next thing you know, you ain't got nothing to worry about. It is what it is. Let them deal with that mess they call politics, because it ain't profited nobody but them. They all vying for the same thing. They all want more power, more money, comfortable existences, all upon the expense of the people who actually sit here and expect them to change something, and they don't. Now, this is hardcore talk. I'm just being real. A lot of people haven't been unplugged from the matrix yet, so of course they're going to always see them in the favor, because that's the light that they cast themselves in that light to make you believe that they are the benefactors of mankind and that you are in trouble. No, solve your own fucking problems. Learn how to understand what civics really are. Learn how to maneuver commercially, and learn some things as far as the definitive policy is implemented amongst the population of people. You are your own head of state. You don't need nobody else to come fucking save you. If you're on the toilet and you have 2 functioning hands, do you really need somebody to wipe your ass? I would hope not, I would hope not, And if you're watching this video around children, please remove them from the space, because these videos aren't for children. It is what it is. But I'm just being real. Why do people not see this? I do not know. Why do people feel as if every 4 years you get hit with the okie doke? Like these 2 knuckleheads that's in office right now. I don't give a fuck about either one of them. Fuck them. They both lied and shucked and jived their way to the top. It is what it is. You know, they both implemented policies that disproportionately affected people of color back in the 90s, before a lot of people had access to the internet and information, or even knew anything about the politics that happened on the Hill. They were the ones fucking shit up back then. So these are the same people who try to come, save face, redirect the conscientiousness of people to them by people who totally overlook their errors of the past. If you don't pay attention to the past, then you are doomed to repeat it. You know, this woman, Kamala Harris, locked up over 1,500 individuals, majority of them well over their time of sentencing, just to keep them as free labor for the state of California. Even had information where an individual was actually on death row and had the evidence to exonerate the man, but didn't do it until the courts compelled her. Mr. Biden, same individual who implemented the crime bill, I believe in the year of 1994, which totally amped up the Clinton administration's whole, policy of imprisoning people for particular periods of time, disproportionately people of color, and it went hand in hand. So I tell people all the time, if you're not paying attention to the history of the past, then you have to also understand why things are happening now, today, in the future. What we call present day, today, or the now. You see what I'm saying? Everyone has their opinions, but what's written on paper is how these people are going to implement the policies that affect you and everyone else around you. See, they don't affect me because I don't even opt into that shit. I don't vote. I don't get government benefits. I don't even fuck with them folks. Period. I don't. And my life has been great. You know what I'm saying? Fantastic. You know what I'm saying? Because my mess is not their mess. And I don't want their mess to become mine. So I keep mine to a minimum by staying out of theirs. And it's just that easy. But a lot of people feel as if through indoctrination and through the public school system that they have to go along to get along. You better wake up. You better wake up quick. Because if you don't, then somebody else is going to guide you by the nose and they're going to direct your future indirectly or directly. Because yes, there is a such thing called indirect control. Whether or not it is a passive control or is it indirect, functional control, is control nonetheless. Now, if you're a sleepwalker, you will be indirectly controlled. Now, if you're one of those people who are just foolhardy, you will be directly controlled. But if you're a person who's peaceable, who just particularly wants to live in your, your limited sphere with your unlimited sovereign power, then you don't have to worry about that, because you know what to do in life and you know how to handle yourself accordingly. And the sad part is this country does not want people who think critically. I don't give a fuck what color you are. I don't give a fuck what age you are. I don't care what ethnicity. I don't give a damn what your standing is. You got politicians and people who try to convince you that this country, just like you had Tim Scott said the other day, this is America. It's not a racist country. This man is the only melanated Republican motherfucker ever in his state, or even on the Senate panel, period. Of course he's going to say that shit. He's going to say what he wants to keep his job and keep them Republican dollars coming. Of course he's going to sell you under the bridge. Who the fuck is going to sit here and convince you that less than 100 years ago, fuck that, less than 70 years ago, people of color were swinging on trees in the South? And you mean to tell me America's not a racist country? Are you out of your fucking mind? And this is the thing that they implement today on social media to try to convince our children that America's not a fucked up place. Please, get that coon out of here. You know what I'm saying? Because I will tell you, they look at him with greater disdain than we do. See, we've been taught the coloristic trend of people being of color being in places and offices. These are some of the worst fucking people you will ever experience in life. Because remember, behind closed doors, the people that they sit and they shuck and jive out in public for don't look like you. And they implement policies that will affect you, and they will implement policies to their benefit. As long as the dollar sign is right, they will throw you right under the bridge. Don't get caught up in that hype, people. Do not get caught up with appearance, because this world is very tricky when it comes to illusionism. Trust me. And y'all see it today. And then you had, quote unquote, vice president, so-called anyway. She come on there, America is not a racist country. She said the same shit. The same goddamn thing. And it just amazes me how they can have so much gall to sit here and lie to the American public to their face, even though we've faced discriminatory practices either in the workplace, either in your living or housing, either let's see, socially. It doesn't matter. This is a racist piece of shit. That's what America is. But they're trying to convince you that you still have a foothold and there is still hope for tomorrow. I'll leave off on this note. If you people believe these people, for any instance of your life, as long as you come to the recognition of truth, you deserve everything that comes in regards to their public office. Because guess what? You knew the truth. You just didn't choose to adhere to it. You chose to lie. You know, it is what it is. You chose that, and they're going to give it to you, and they don't care. And you just learned a very significant truth in less than 26 minutes. It's the facts, people. We cannot allow our future generations to keep buying into this stupid shit. See, as information spreads and time goes on, you have to realize the controllers, the so-called controllers anyway, were the only thing that they had over people was the influx of knowledge. And once it's taught properly, then they start losing sway. So now they have to go with the force behind things to try to implement their policies because they know now people aren't going to consent because they know better. And they're not going to go with the flow, and they're going to start focusing on their own self-determination. I suggest y'all stick with that path. Stick to your own self-determination healthfully, and make sure that you never give an individual the time or the opportunity to try to say otherwise. You know, stay sovereign, stay peaceful, you know, and above all else, protect yourself. Protect your family. It is what it is. Because you've been given this life by a creator, not by any dictatorial powers of government. So that's the only government I go by, my creator's government, through the effulgence of the human spirit. And man, please, his ends of days is worms anyway. So all those papers and all those things they write, they're going to perish with those same people. Live in the law of the spirit, people. You ain't never got to worry about man's law, or what we call just, which according to legal definition is man's way. Got to get up out of that, y'all. You know? Only one lawgiver. That's the creator, period. It is what it is. Stay true to yourself. Y'all stay safe. Peace, light, love. Stay away from the fuck-ass vaccines, too. You know what I'm saying? No matter what media says, and things are knocking people off. And there's nothing more greater than them wanting to actually implement that policy. Do what you want, but hey, I come as the messenger. Here's what it is. Stay tuned for the next upload.